Welcome to Unite Now, where we bring unity to you, wherever you are.
Hello, thank you for joining us today in this session of Unite Now. Today we're going to talk about tips and tricks for developing in Unity with Visual Studio. Today I'm going to be your host. My name is Arturo. I'm a games evangelist at Unity, and I have a very special co-host today, Abdullah Hamed from Microsoft. Hey, Abdullah, how are you?
Hey, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. So tell us a bit about what you do at Microsoft and the Visual Studio team.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm the program manager for the Visual Studio tools for Unity. I cover a whole bunch of different game development workloads at Visual Studio too.
Okay, awesome. So people can reach out to you in case they want to provide feedback on Visual Studio and experience with Unity.
Yeah, okay? That is correct. Yeah,
perfect. Awesome. So thank you for being here. Let's start with the presentation. These are the takeaways for today. So basically, we will learn how to debug in Visual Studio, how to collaborate remotely using Visual Studio, and GitHub, LiveShare, and of course in the context of Unity. And we will also give you some extra tricks for your Visual Studio and Unity coding experience. This is the agenda for today. So let's start first by talking about Visual Studio, what Visual Studio is, and also Visual Studio tools for Unity. So Abdullah, can you tell us more about what Visual Studio is?
Sure. So Visual Studio Community Edition 2019 is the world-class C# coding and debugging experience. It's the place where you can write C# code for Unity. It's available for both Mac and Windows. It's the default IDE or integrated development environment when you install Unity. It offers different tools. So if you're writing code within an IDE, especially Visual Studio, it provides you with different tools like code completion. So if you press, for example, game object dot, it will like complete, show you the different options you can use within your code. It also includes the Roslyn Analyzer, and this tool analyzes your code, your performance, and recommends different type of refactoring options that you have. It also empowers you to like rename things, and it will automate a lot of functionalities when trying to refactor your code. It includes Visual Studio includes different themes also. It has built-in source control, which I'm excited to talk about today because we just released a new experience. There's customizable layout, so you have like different windows. Just like Unity, you can customize your windows inside of Visual Studio. And Visual Studio for Windows also has a really cool features that I'm really excited about, like Visual Studio LiveShare. Also, IntelliCode. IntelliCode is the same as IntelliSense or the code completion that we talked about earlier, but it is powered by an AI in the backend. The good thing about Visual Studio, the Community Edition 2019, is that it's completely free. And the one thing that I want to point out is that the Visual Studio Community Edition 2019, the Community Edition specifically, actually has the same functionality as the Enterprise or the Professional editions. The only difference, like licensing, it's the same thing as what Unity provides. You know, depending on who's using it, licenses are a little bit different, but the functionality are completely the same between the different editions of Visual Studio.
Awesome. So yeah, the both people can start creating games with Unity and Visual Studio, and they don't have to pay when they start, which is pretty cool.
Exactly. And within Visual Studio, also, you can create different types of applications too. You can create mobile, web, C++ applications, any type of applications. But specifically with Visual Studio, in this context is that you can also write code, C# code specifically for Unity.
Cool, perfect. Now
Yeah.
we've talked about Visual Studio in general. What tools in particular does the Visual Studio tools provide for Unity developers?
Yeah, so this is the power of the integration between Unity and Visual Studio. Visual Studio Tools for Unity, which is installed by default when you install Visual Studio through Unity, you can just tick the, and if you're installing it Visual Studio standalone, you can just tick the Unity workload and it'll install Visual Studio Tools for Unity. It's like I said, it's installed with the Visual Studio. It allows Visual Studio to attach itself. Attach the debugger within Visual Studio Tools for Unity to Unity, and that allows them both to kind of talk to each other. It also allows Visual Studio to attach to games that are developed with Unity that are in debug mode, so you can debug a running game. And it also attaches to, it doesn't have to be like a PC game, it can also attach to an Android device too, if you have a game running on debug mode there. It offers IntelliSense code completion for the Unity APIs and messages. So specifically, it will go into details of, it's aware of the Unity APIs, I should say. That's a better way to put it. So it will give you a recommendation specifically for your Unity C# code. It offers a simple Unity project explorer too, so you don't have to mess around with the C# solution that Unity generates. It's kind of like a file explorer with like a tree format. It also supports for unsafe code debugging. So if you want to go do that, it's an advanced topic, but it allows for that. Also, the Roslyn Analyzer, which was developed for a generic C# experience, is also available to Unity developers. And we have created Unity-specific analyzers, as well as suppressors for analyzer rules that do not apply to Unity projects, and we can talk about that more later. And the cool thing too is that these suppressors and analyzers are available completely for free on not for free. It's these analyzers are open source completely on GitHub, so people can go in and add their own and modify them and introduce and share with the whole community the analyzers and suppressors that they have created.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, we will keep coming back to all these features. Actually, we're gonna mention them, but yeah, that was a great overview. And let's start with like the demos. Okay, so first we will be using this demo. It's on the Asset Store. It's one of the coding kits for beginners. It's pretty simple. The code is not extremely complex, and it's free on the Asset Store. So this is the project that we will be using today. So back to the Roslyn Analyzer, which you have mentioned, Abdullah. Now, I just want to show here in Visual Studio what that means. And I'm going to open any script here. Let's say this inventory system. I should have opened it beforehand. It loads pretty fast, and that's actually one tip. You don't have to close Visual Studio every time you have to go back to Unity. The recommendation is just start Visual Studio and your entire session should be there. So the analyzers are are very useful in cases such as, I don't think this was a good example, but let's say here, this is not a great example either. Yes, this extends mono behavior. So in many cases, we have things such as, I don't know, like avoid awake method, which is a Unity method. And you know, like if you're not using these methods, it's going to cost some performance overhead. And if you have one component or one object with this component, it doesn't really matter. But if you start creating thousands of hundreds of training dummies, this is going to add up, and you don't want that, especially if it doesn't do anything. So this is the analyzer working. So let's see. Here you see that we have this. Oh no, this is not the one. Here, the analyzer is telling us, okay, remove the empty Unity message. So it's aware of what's going on, and just by having not us as humans seeing what's going on, the analyzer is telling us, okay, this is a small fix that you can have right away. And as Abdullah was saying, on GitHub, you can see the list of all the analyzers and suppressors. So there are things like the empty Unity message, which is the one that I was using, and you can see it's on the performance category. Also some things related to strings, etc. So yeah, pretty useful. And there's actually, you are encouraging people to submit their ideas, right, for other analyzers and suppressors.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, one of the cool things that this analyzer does is that it will recognize, for example, that usually within any C# context, if you have a function that is not being called anywhere else, then it will give you a warning to kind of delete that function because it's not being called anywhere, and why should you have that in there? But in the context of Unity, for example, if you're using a Unity message like on collision, enter, for example, then it will be aware, and we suppress that rule. And that's kind of what a suppressor is. There are rules to do things, but then there are rules to suppress them. And so with the cool thing about the Roslyn Analyzer with Visual Studio Tools for Unity is that it's aware on collision enter is a function of is a Unity message, so it does not recommend that you delete it.
Okay, cool, perfect.
Yeah.
So the next one is also talking about Unity messages and implementing Unity messages. This is a pretty cool trick. It's basically just a shortcut, but it's very helpful. So let's jump into Unity again. I'm gonna create a new script. Unity. Okay, so let me explain what I want to do. So I have this potion game object here. The potion game object has this collider. So and it's set to isTrigger. What I want to do is to create a script that whenever the on trigger enter event is raised, we do something, right? So this is pretty simple. I'm gonna create a new C# script, and I'm gonna name it potion test. It doesn't really matter. And a lot of times what happens to me is I don't remember the signature for the on trigger enter or on collision enter. So I have to go. So I have to go to the documentation because I don't remember if it receives a collider or a collision or what does it receive. So if you just click Ctrl-Shift-M, you see that we have a new window telling us which Unity messages we want to implement. So in this case, I want on trigger enter. So I just check that box and I say, okay, yeah, implement that for me. So you can see, okay, it comes with the correct signature. But another interesting thing is that I've been using these to learn about new events that I didn't know existed. So like on joint break, well, I didn't the 2D and a 3D one. So yeah, it's an interesting tool to also learn. These are all the Unity events. You can go to the Unity documentation and see what they are doing, the order of execution, etc. But this is a pretty nice trick to save some time and making sure you're implementing them.
Yeah, that's how I learned about on collision stay. Actually, I didn't know that was a thing until I went there. It's like, oh, that's a thing.
Yeah, pretty useful. So the next one is a Unity Project Explorer. This is an interesting view because well, you have the Project Explorer in Visual Studio, or where you can see all your solutions and all your scripts and everything within your project. In the context of Unity, we have 3D models, textures, audio files, and in some cases it's weird, right? So in this case, Visual Studio comes with the Unity Project Explorer, which basically shows us in the same order the directory of all the scripts, all the shaders, all the text files. I think if you have like JSON files, they will also show up here. I don't know if we have any of them here, but like that.
Anything supported by Visual Studio, it will show it up here.
Okay.
But it's mostly like focusing on the context of Unity and like stripping away any project files or configuration files that are, irrelevant for a Unity developer.
Yeah, and it's cool because in the past, my workflow was something like, okay, I'm coding something here, and I need to open another script, so I have to jump back into Unity and search for that script. And now I can do that directly within Visual Studio. So I have everything here at hand, and it's pretty useful. And also you get the other cool things such as the class view and the methods view. So yeah, that's another short tip. The next one is debugging, and this is one of my favorite ones because a lot of programmers, either if they are programmers or artists or whoever writes code in Unity, what we do is we just flood the Unity console with debug.logs all around the place, right? It's okay. In some cases, it's fast, it's easy, but in many cases, when you are in some edge cases or when you are trying to see what's going on, it's easier to have the proper tools. And I think the thing that you can attach Unity, Visual Studio to Unity and do the debugging, it's pretty important. So yeah, let's take a look at our script here, the training dummy script. So this object here, these dummies over here, they have this training dummy script, and let's see what happens when we when the start gets executed. Okay, so that's what we are gonna do. If we want to debug, we need a couple of things. The first thing is that we need to set breakpoints. So basically, in our code, we're telling Visual Studio, like, whenever you're executing, stop here. Basically let me see and inspect what's going on here. So let me actually put one on line 16. And then the next thing is we need to connect Visual Studio with Unity. There are two options: the attach to Unity, which basically starts the communication, right, between Visual Studio and Unity. But there's this other one, which is super useful, the attach to Unity and play. So this allows us to connect to Unity and also to launch Unity from within Visual Studio. So I don't have to jump into Unity to see what's going on. So let's see what happens. We attach to Unity and play. We go to Unity. And you can see here that we're back in Visual Studio because the breakpoint was reached. So here we can inspect things such as the chart data object. And you can see here that the can attack is set to true. And we can keep inspecting the values of each of these properties. So this is the way you can actually inspect multiple things at the time without having to flood the console with debug messages.
And you can also have like the debug kind of window up. It's usually at the bottom. Let's see if we can raise it up. But you can look at all the local variables from there too.
Okay, so yeah, it's under debug, Windows, and we have the locals option. So you can inspect here, as you were saying, Abdullah.
Yeah, it's usually pops up, but if it didn't, if you hit it for some reason, then yeah, that's how you get it.
Okay, cool. Another thing that I recently learned is the fact that you can add some conditions to your breakpoint. So if you right-click on your breakpoint and you click on conditions, you can say, okay, just break here if this conditional expression or number of instances is met. So in this case, it's just if chart data is I just cared of this breakpoint if the chart data is null, which is pretty useful, and it's something I didn't know about previously. So let's continue. And debugging is more than what we just did. So, but this is just a quick example of what you can.
If anything, I think the most powerful thing about Visual Studio Tools for Unity is the debugging experience.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people who do start learning about how to code don't really understand the concept of debugging at the beginning. But to be able to understand that you have variables that have content in them and values, and at any time you can just stop the execution of your code to really look at that memory and how does it look like, and what's in there. Yeah, like if your game is crashing because you're dividing by whatever, like causing any like edge cases, you can like search for that, especially with the conditional breakpoints. Like in C# it's not big of an issue, but like on other type of coding like C++, if you divide by 0, it'll crash your applications. But you can have that in there and kind of catch whenever these things happen. And yeah, so you get a lot more visibility and observability of your code that way.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. People should tell us if they will be interested in us making something just on debugging.
I would love that.
Interesting. Okay, yeah, let us know if you're interested in something like this. We actually enjoy a lot jumping and preparing these presentations. So
yeah.
Okay. So the next one is also a small tip, the comment code block. So let's say we have, I don't know, this function over here, and I want to comment it out because I'm doing some tests, etc. I can comment everything just by using the Control K and Control C shortcut just to comment it out, and I can do the same thing. I can uncomment if I do Control K and then Control U. You see how I remove the comment lines? You can do that on a per line basis or just a block of code. It's pretty quick, pretty useful. So yeah, remember just Control K and Control C. So you can hold Control and click K and then release K and then Control and then hit C. So yeah, that's this one. The other one is the Clipboard History shortcut as well. So most of the time we're doing copy paste, right? And in some cases we copy something, we go and paste it somewhere else, and then go to another place and then paste the other thing again. There's an easy way to do something like this. So how does this work? Let me just make my code a bit smaller. Yeah.
I don't know about you, but like that's all I do pretty much is copy paste code.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. So let's say we have these booleans over here, and I want to copy this line for any reason. So I do Control C, and then I want to copy this third line, and then I do Control C again. So I want to paste them somewhere else in my code. This is just an example, right? What I'm going to do is Control Shift V, and you can see here that now the clipboard, instead of just directly pasting it, is showing us what's on the clipboard. So we have the latest two copies that we did, and I can select which one I want to paste. Okay, so this is very useful, and it works across different files, so it doesn't have to be on the same file. So it's a simple tip, but pretty useful. I also use it a lot. So yeah, when we're coding, we also most of the time we code something and we say like, okay, this works, but I still have to do some extra things later. So what we do is we add a comment with the to do and then the explanation of what we did or what we need to implement. Also, sometimes we hack something around that we want to come back later and fix, and we do another like comment with the hack and then the explanation on how this works. Right. The challenge here is that sometimes we don't remember where we added those things, and we can do like a control F to find in our documents, but there's actually a task list that allows us to see all these pending things. So if I go to Visual Studio and I go to my view and then task list, you can see here that in my project I already have some things that I have to fix later, right? So for instance, I have this optimize later here, so I don't want to be destroying objects, or I want to fix this later. Something that I want to do here, or even just this hack, right? Like this is a quick thing, so the Unity console is not throwing warnings because this is serialized and it's also not public. So this is just a quick hack, and you can also configure your the priority of this one. So if I go to tools, I go then to options. Then I go to environment, and here it should be the task list. We can change the different priorities for our tokens. So let's say hack is maybe has a higher priority than the to do, etc. But yeah, this is an easy way to do that, and you can create your own tokens as well. So just a quick tip as well.
Yeah, that's a cool tip.
The next one is snippets. So basically, sometimes also you want to insert certain pieces of code that you don't want to type, from scratch, like an if-def, or you don't want to make sure that you have a piece of code and you want to insert that into a loop. You don't want to, hit tab on all those lines of code. So you can do that in a very, very easy and simple way. So let's open again here the Unity editor, and let's go to our weapon script over here. And you can see here that, for instance, here, everything that is part of the weapon editor class, it has to be in between the if Unity editor. Otherwise, if I remove them, if you code something, this is not gonna throw any errors. It's gonna work while you are in the editor. However, once you compile this, or you try to compile this, you will encounter some errors because the editor class doesn't exist at runtime. So you need to cover all this code within the if preprocessing directive. So what are we going to do here? We're going to select these two lines. We're going to click the Control KS, and you can see here that it says, okay, do you want me to surround this with an if, a region, a class, a do, etc.? I'm going to use the if, and instead of true, I'm going to set this to Unity editor. So now, I build this, if I build my game, if I create an executable, this is not going to cause the build to fail because it's going to get stripped out from the build. So yeah.
I used this before when I was creating a mobile game, and as you might know, depends on touch screens. Yes. But I wanted to debug it in the editor really quickly, so I just assigned keyboard shortcuts. Mm-hmm. And I just wrapped it around the Unity editor instead. Yeah. So it only runs in the editor and it will not run in the final product. So this is like kind of a usage that you can that is applicable here.
Sure. Awesome. So yeah, that's it for the snippet insertions. You can create your own custom snippets as well if you want. But yeah, those are like the built-in ones with Visual Studio. Now, the next one is this one that is called multi-caret. It's at first it's weird, but once you start using it, it's pretty useful. So basically, what it allows us is to select multiple lines of code at the same time and modify them, even if they are not next to each other, or even if they are like separated or unrelated. And let's take a look at one example where this makes more sense. So if I go to my equipment item class on line 73, and I'm looking at my notes here, we have these properties, these variables that are Boolean, which basically let us know if we require certain ability to be able to pick up this item or to equip this item, right? By default, everything is compared to 0. But what if we want to make some changes to these values? And in this case, we want to make the changes at the 3 lines at the same time. So what we need to do is I'm gonna click the Control Alt and then click here on the first line, then Control Alt and click on the second line, and then do the same thing on the third line. You can see I have the multiple carets here, and I can change the value here to something like 1. Well, I want to do 100, 101, 101. Or what if I have already a variable somewhere there and oh, I made a mistake there. Let me just fix this. Control Alt click, Control click, and let's say I have a variable, so I'm going to put something m. Right. So that's the way you can do this in a very quick manner. By the way, if you see on Unity projects a lot of variables named like these, like m underscore, that m it's because that variable is a member variable of our class. So sometimes you see like something like a k for constant, an s for static. So yeah, it's just I guess useful.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah, especially if you go to like Unity repositories like demos, that's the nomenclature that we use, the standard. So yeah, that's what it means. The next one is another very simple one, the Unity messages custom colors. So you can see here that, for instance, this get description one. And let's see if I have something that extends mono behavior. Our good old training dummy. So we have this update position over here, and we have our update and our start. We can change the color of those methods. Wait, why is update not changing? Let's see, we can change the color of those methods. If I go to tools, options, then to general. Let me just fonts and colors, and then let's look for the Unity message one. So we have the Unity message, and this is the color that we want to apply to the font for all the Unity messages that we have in our script. So I'll do that. I'll leave them as automatic. I don't want them to be bold, and you can see here. Did I do something wrong? Let's see. Tools. Unity message. Oh, wow. Set to automatic. Okay, I want them to be green and the background to be automatic. So I click OK. And then you can see, yeah, sorry, I did something wrong. So these two are Unity messages. They will have the green color, and any other method that I have in my code is going to have a different color. So in this case, and you can also modify the color of other methods, but in this case, it's pretty obvious that it's pretty obvious that this is a Unity event. So as much as you have more Unity events, it's easier to read these things. Okay, so. Last,
yeah, I like doing this really quickly because it's really it like see right away is like where the Unity messages are, and it really can speed up your development cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. And the last one is the renaming shortcut, which actually Abdullah taught me something that I had no idea, and it made my life so easier. So, sometimes we want to rename some properties, some methods, etc. You can just go there and change the name, but you need to make sure that you change the name on all the references there. So you can do it manually. You can do it by replacing the strings, but you will have some troubles there. So here you can use, for instance, here in my equipment item, I want to change the name of this enumeration. I can just right-click, rename, and change the name of my enumerator here, and you can see that I will change it on all the references to that one, which is pretty cool. Now, what you taught me last week is that you can also rename the classes here. Like this potion test, which remember, if you're on the Unity context, you have to you need to make sure that your C# script has the same name as your class, right? The class extension.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay. So if you renamed your script here or from Unity, you're going to start getting compilation errors because you don't have this matching. So the cool thing is I can select my class name here, right-click, or use the shortcut. I can rename it. And as long as I have this rename file option checked, I can change it to thanks.
I also recommend clicking on preview changes. I really like that feature a lot.
Okay.
Yeah. And now when you click apply, it will actually show you where it's going to change it.
Ah, that's so cool. Yeah.
Yeah. And this way, so it doesn't just change it right away and you don't know what the hell is happening. You can just, for what's happening, you can just change it.
Awesome. That's awesome. That's pretty cool. And especially for new people using Unity, this is important because it's not clear that your class name and your file name should share the same name, right? So yeah, this is very useful. I'm not going to change it. So yeah, that's it for this tip. Now let's talk about two other cool collaboration tools, Abdullah, and then let's demo them.
Sure. Yeah, one of the cool features that I'm really excited about, and I really love to share with people how to use it, is Visual Studio Live Share. Visual Studio Live Share is available on Windows, and it, especially during this time where we can't really see each other and can't see our teammates face to face, sometimes you just need your friend and your teammate to just look over your shoulder, look at your code, and help you out really quickly with scripting, and maybe code debug with you too. LiveShare can provide that for you. So you can instantly share your instance of Visual Studio with them using just a link. You don't need to clone a repository or set up a new environment. Like I said, it allows you to co-edit and co-debug together. It has an audio call feature, so you can just chat. And like I said, you can just generate it using a link. So let me try to demo it right now. How about that?
Yeah. Let's do that.
Let me share my screen now.
Okay.
And here's my Visual Studio.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so as you can see on the top right button, there is the Live Share logo or button. You can just click on that, and it will generate a link for you right away. and it just copied it again to the clipboard. You can see here. You can also make it so it's a read-only session. So so if I'm sharing it with Arturo can't really change my code. But that's not what we want. I want Arturo to help me out. So this when I can just share the link. Right now, you can share it anywhere you want, on Twitter, on Microsoft Teams, on any chat application or email or anything like that.
Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen now to see what's going on my side.
Sure.
So I just clicked on the link. I can open it on Visual Studio now. So I'm gonna do that. It's gonna launch Visual Studio. It's actually another instance of Visual Studio because my other project is not related to this one. That's why it's relaunching.
Yeah, so it's not going to mess up your project that you're working on or anything like that.
Yeah. So let's see. Okay. Yeah. So I see you here. Oh, nice.
Yeah, I can see my cursor.
Okay. So yeah. I could give you like some comments on what's going on here, right? Like I would recommend you to do something here, or actually I could jump in and change the code. Let's say, oh, you shouldn't use the force mode impulse. You should use the acceleration mode.
Sure.
Get the IntelliSense from Unity, right? Like
yes. You're getting the full code completion, all the features that are available in Visual Studio when you're doing that. The cool thing too now is that if I debugged, attach to Unity, and let's put in a breakpoint here, and then let me run Unity real quick, run the game. Run Unity is
and you were mentioning like you can do these like in a Zoom call or in a Teams call or whatever, but it's not the same experience, right? Like it's not the same as me telling like, oh, go to line 16, go to line 17 or things like that. I can actually see what's going on here and change, make changes and explore.
Yeah, I mean this happens in an instant. So here I am running running the game on Unity while the debug session is attached. And as you can see, or can't you see it? Are we on your screen or my screen?
We're on my screen. So right. We're actually inspecting the rigid body object here, and we're actually seeing the values of your Unity game, right? Like even when I'm not running that game here in my computer. So
exactly, it really helps for people to like debug things together, especially if you're using conditional breakpoints. That really helps out. Debugging is really powerful, and I really hope a lot of people use debugging as well as LifeShare to work together and kind of figure out where the issues are and kind of reduce the bugs that are in their game.
Awesome. Yeah, this is probably my favorite feature of all the ones that we've discussed today. So yeah, this is pretty cool. And then after you stop the session, people won't be able to see that, right? Like you have control over that as well. Like
of course,
security there. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So the one other feature that I want to talk about, or I should say a service that I want to talk about is GitHub for Unity. GitHub is a way, or Git in general is a way to store your code and files in a way where you can keep track of them, and keep revisions, and even going back to the older revisions. And it also allows you to create branches or share your code with other people, so a lot of people can collaborate together on one project. there's a service called GitHub if you're not familiar with it, and you can just create a repository for your code, make it private or public, and so all of your teammates can collaborate together on your Unity project. GitHub for Unity provides a free and open source plugin for Unity. And there's also a dedicated desktop app for GitHub. And you can also use GitHub as or just Git in general in command line. And when you create a repository on GitHub, you have the option to create it for Unity specifically, and it will generate something called a git ignore file for you. A git ignore file just tells Git which files you should include and not include in your repository. For example, Unity creates a whole library folder and solution files and whatnot where you don't really need to store those because Unity generates those automatically, and they're kind of the same. So it's not specific to your project, and we're just going to take up space. So a git ignore file makes sure that you're not storing just Unity files and not project files. What's cool and what I want to show here is the new Git experience within Visual Studio. In Visual Studio 16.6 specifically. So let's go there. Yeah, let's take a look at that. So the way to activate this new interface is or new experience by going to Tools, Options, and under Environments, you'll see Preview Features. Mm-hmm. Scroll down until you see the new Git experience here, and just make sure it's checked. And that will create a new Git tab over here next to your Solution Explorer and Unity Project Explorer. In here, I've already created a repository earlier, and I put in my code in there, and I've shared it with Arturo. And we can go into details on how to create a repository and all of that. If viewers want to watch, me and Arturo can create a more in-depth of how to use Git in general with Unity projects. Because I know a lot of people, for example, are afraid of updating their Unity installations because they don't want to break things. But it's really it's a good way to create a new branch, for example, in Git and update your Unity project and test things out. If it didn't work, you already have your original branch. So there's a lot of topics that we can talk about on how to use GitHub. But here, I wanted to show how what's new in the new interface. And the thing that I want to show the most is kind of like the diff screen and how you can see changes between what is available on Git on the remote location and what is available on your local machine. So I have done some changes, and I shared the repo with Arturo, and then I made some more changes, and I think Arturo made some changes on your side too, on the same file, right?
Yeah. So I'm actually going to do some changes in the file right now. So what I did before was pulling everything that's on the repository. So I have the exact same version of the code as you have. So I'm not going to share my screen. I'm just adding something, and then you will be able to see it there. So on the update, we are fetching if we're asking if the key, if any key down was pressed. So right now we just have space, but I'm just going to add another one. Just 1 second.
Let me share my screen again.
Yeah. So I'm going to allow the player to jump with the spacebar or with a jump. So I've changed this. I'm going to create a commit message. and I'm going to commit push. It's ready. Should be ready.
Great. So let me try to pull here.
Yeah.
So we're both working on the same file.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's telling me that I have to commit my changes too. So let me do that. First, added a fixed update function. This is just not really a very meaningful message, but just for the sake of this demo, let's do that. Usually you would want to put more meaningful messages in there. So let's pull. All right. So we can look at like the specific commit that Arturo did. Let's see. In here, we can look into what are the differences between the two files that are available that were different from what was on the repo and what has changed. Yeah. And yeah, it seems like both of my changes are there too, because I committed and it kind of merged it automatically. That's kind of cool.
Yep.
Yeah. But you can see.
Sorry. No, I was just going to mention that there are some cases when this merge is not as straightforward. For instance, if we are both modifying the same line of code, or if we are trying to, if I changed like a 3D model and you changed the same 3D model, so Git doesn't know how to merge those files, right? So you will need to manually resolve those conflicts.
Yeah, exactly. And it'll give you a choice to either keep those changes, or if you want to ignore them, and you can submit your own changes. So that's kind of what's cool about the new interface right now with the new Git experience. And we can get more in depth about we can go more in depth about how to use Git for Unity in more videos if everybody's interested.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that will be very interesting to see the real power of Git and GitHub and the integration.
And yeah, I guess that's all we wanted to show everybody today, right?
Yeah, that's it. I'm just gonna share my screen again, just to give a couple of extra links for people interested in learning more about what we discussed today. But yeah, that was pretty much it. And lastly, I would like to thank you, Abdullah, for joining us. It was great, and I hope people really reach out to us and let us know if they are interested in us doing some more material on GitHub or on debugging Unity games with Visual Studio. But thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.